Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our library's monthly nature program from the National Park Service. Tonight's program is all about horseshoe crabs. My name is Tara Moran. I'm a librarian at the Mastic Mauritius Shirley Community Library, and I'm happy to introduce you to tonight's speaker, Roxana Saravia. She is a park ranger with the Fire Island National Seashore. A little bit about Roxana. She's studied biology as an undergraduate and has her master's in marine conservation and policy. She previously interned with the Fire Island National Seashore and has returned as a park ranger. This is her second year working for the National Park Service, and we're happy to have her here tonight. Roxana, if you're ready, please tell us all about horseshoe crabs.
Hi everyone, how are you? Excited to be here. So today we're going to be talking about horseshoe crabs, Limulus polyphemus, the original blue blood. And let's get started. All right, so horseshoe crabs are an ancient species. Their ancestors originated several 100 million years ago. They're related to trilobites, and they're more closely related to spiders and scorpions, and not crabs. So their phylum is Arthropoda, their subphylum is Cheilicerata, and their class is Merostomata. There are 4 species of horseshoe crab present today, and 3 of them are in Asia. We do have an Atlantic species, and that is Limulus polyphemus, the one that we'll be talking about today. We're going to start off with the anatomy of a horseshoe crab. So I'm going to turn on my laser pointer really quick just so that I can circle around. The 3 main parts are the prosoma, which is this front part right here, the horseshoe crab's shaped side, the opisthosoma, and that's the rear end, and then the telson, which is commonly referred to as the tail. It's a bit cut off in this picture, but you can see it a little bit. A really neat thing about horseshoe crabs is that they have 10 eyes. Using my laser pointer, I'm just going to try to point them out. You have a set of compound lateral eyes, which are these big eyes right here. Those are really similar to the eyes in insects, such as bees. Right above that, not too visible in this picture, but there's a tiny little dark spot, and those are the rudimentary lateral eyes. Has a pair of those, so one on each side as well. And then right here in this little area, it kind of looks like the nose of the horseshoe crab. You have 3 eyes. You have 2 median eyes and 1 endoparietal eyes. And then not on the horseshoe crab, like they're underneath, so you can't see it on the top. You have 2 ventral eyes. They're on the underside near the mouth. And then you also have photoreceptors along the telson, which kind of make up 1 eye. Now, those compound lateral eyes can take in visible light. Those rudimentary eyes sense light, so they don't fully function in terms of sight, but they can tell if it's light or dark. And those median and ventral eyes sense light as well. The median eyes also can sense UV light. And those are all important so that the horseshoe crab can tell whether it's daytime or nighttime. So the horseshoe crab also has 6 pairs of legs. The front pair of legs right here is referred to as the chelicerae, and those are modified for guiding food into the crab's mouth. Then there are 5 pairs of walking legs. The first pair is modified in males. It's shaped like a horseshoe crab, and it's got kind of like a little hook structure so that it can hook on to females during mating season. The 3 other main legs are referred to as ambulatory legs, and their main purpose is walking. And then that last pair of legs is, they're called pusher legs, and they use those to push off the bottom of the seafloor. And each leg, aside for that male first walking pair, has a really small claw at the tip. They're not like your typical crab claws. They can barely pinch. They're very skinny looking. I'd compare it to almost like a clip, like a tiny little clip. This picture right here, I'm gonna circle it with the laser. That's the mouth of the horseshoe crab. It's at the base of the legs, and there's bristles on the side that are called gnathobases. The crab will grind up food in its mouth, and it'll also use those gonadotropes to guide the food towards its mouth. And then right here, you have the gills. Those are used for breathing, swimming, and they help draw in water into the shell to split it open when it's time to molt. The telson of the horseshoe crab is not a stinger. There's a common misconception that that people will think it can sting with it, kind of like a stingray, but it's harmless. It uses it mainly for sight, and it can also use it to prop itself upright. Due to the shape of the horseshoe crab, if it flips over, it can be really difficult to flip back over. So that telson is really important. If the horseshoe crab isn't able to flip itself back over, it can become susceptible to becoming prey to birds or any other large animals that are on the beach. And it is very fragile. So if you happen to see a horseshoe crab on the beach, don't pick it up by its telson. It could snap off. And if that happens, it's pretty bad for the crab. So you just want to pick it up from its sides and gently flip it over. Like I mentioned before, the pincers on its claws are very small, so it cannot hurt you. Now, horseshoe crabs do also have a variety of sensors. The first and most common are pegs sensilium. Those are found on the edges, the ridges, and on these little spines along the body of the horseshoe crab. Those are their touch receptors. It's what allows the horseshoe crab to feel its environment. The next receptor is called pit sensilium. They're external pores found throughout the shell of the horseshoe crab, and those are chemical receptors. And then the last one is the flabellum. It's found on the pusher leg, which is that last set of the walking legs on the horseshoe crab. And those help test the composition of the water before the horseshoe crab kind of like propels that water towards its gills. Now, there are a few differences between male and female horseshoe crabs. The females are bigger. They're approximately 25 to 30% larger once they've reached maturity. And then the adults do also have that modified claw that I mentioned before. This is a really good picture of it. It's kind of like bulky at the bottom. And then these ones up here are what they look like on the female and on all of the other walking legs. If you were to look at a horseshoe crab from the front, you would notice that the female shell is relatively flat and that the male's is arched. That is due to mating. Like the males will attach the back of the shell of the horseshoe crab, the female horseshoe crab, so she's a little flatter. And now my favorite thing about horseshoe crabs is that they have blue blood, and that makes them very unique. So the blood contains a copper compound called hemocyanin, which is different from humans because we have an iron-based compound, and that's hemoglobin. When this compound reacts with oxygen, it turns a bluish color, which is really similar to humans. When our blood reacts to oxygen, it turns red. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the life history of horseshoe crabs now. So breeding season tends to occur in May and June. The females reach maturity around the age of 9 to 10. And when that happens, they'll make their way over to the beach. Horseshoe crab spawning tends to happen around the full and new moon. So it happens at nighttime. You tend to see like large gatherings of horseshoe crabs, and that's when you know that it's spawning season. So on average, a mature female can hold about 60,000 eggs. That's an average because larger females tend to hold more than the smaller ones. And the eggs are 3 to 4 centimeters and bluish green. This picture on the right is several eggs found in the rack line on one of our beaches. And you can see that they're so small. If you weren't looking, it's very easy to miss. And, typically they're in clusters. So you could pick up a cluster and it's still going to be smaller than the palm of your hand. When the female comes up to spawn, she releases pheromones, which attracts the male. And then those light receptors that I was talking about that can tell between day or night, they use that to tell whether it's a full moon or a new moon as well. So that those are just some environmental cues that the horseshoe crab has when it's mating season. So the female will come to the beach, she'll release her pheromones, attract some males, and she'll bury herself into the sand and deposit her eggs. She tries to bury them anywhere from 5 to 30 centimeters deep, preferably deeper, because if they're too close to the surface, they can become food for birds. And then there are studies indicating that the sediment kind of acts as an incubator for the eggs as well. So in about 3 to 4 weeks, the eggs hatch and they emerge as trilobite larvae. And the rate of development of those eggs is affected by tides and other environmental cues such as temperature, moisture, oxygen. And there are studies indicating that the crabs prefer sandy, porous, well-oxygenated beaches. And that's probably just because it leads to better development rates in the eggs. Now, when those larvae, the horseshoe crab larvae enter the water column when the nest is inundated or covered by water, they remain as larvae for about 7 to 10 days until they can first molt. And horseshoe crabs need to molt in order to grow. Now, you can see in this picture right here how they start off really, really small and they get bigger. When they come out of the egg, they're roughly that size. So they start molting at that size and they just get larger up into like the biggest horseshoe crab you've ever seen. The juveniles will molt several times in their first year, and once they reach about a year in age, they tend to molt once a year, probably in like late summer. And the juveniles stay in shallow water for 1 to 2 years. Once they're a little more mature, they do venture out into deeper waters and they come back to shallow waters for mating. And males do mature a little faster than females. For them, it's 8 to 10 years, and for the females, it's 9 to 10 years. And I did also see a study that said at a planktonic stage, 97.5 of the larvae are lost, which is a pretty small survival rate, if you ask me. Now, horseshoe crabs do hold a lot of ecological significance. The eggs can be food for crabs, fish, birds, etc. This picture right here is of the red knot, and this is a shorebird that really depends on horseshoe crab eggs. So the red knot will migrate from South America to Canada, which is a really long trip. So by the time they arrive at our beaches here on Long Island or Delaware or anywhere in between, they've already had a really long trip and they're, beat. So they have to replenish their energy using the fat stores in the eggs, and they're a really great source of nutrients for them. So a few years back, scientists noticed that the population of red knots was declining, and they noticed that it was declining along with the horseshoe crab species. So red knot protection essentially led to horseshoe crab protection as well. And the red knots are protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and they're listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. Young horseshoe crabs are also food for birds, crabs, whelks, fish, and turtles, basically anything that's swimming around in their habitat. And then adult horseshoe crab are food for turtles, gulls, fox. If it washes up on the beach, anything, we'll pretty much eat it. And then they can also carry miniature ecosystems such as slipper shells, snails, mussels, barnacles, seagrass, all over the shell. And it doesn't bother them. I've seen a lot of horseshoe crabs, live what seems like happy lives with a ton of shell, like barnacles and stuff covering them. As long as it doesn't cover those eyes or those photoreceptors, they're pretty unharmed from all of that extra life on them. And then limulus leech is like a type of flatworm that is found specifically on horseshoe crabs, and it's endemic to them. Horseshoe crabs do also hold a human significance. The Native Americans used them for fertilizer. They were also used for like containers, possibly shoes, spear points, and potentially food, but there isn't that much meat in horseshoe crabs, so that part, we're not too sure about that. They can also be used for fertilizer and livestock feed, and that was really common practice up until the mid-20th century. And the chitin from the exoskeleton is used for contact lenses, skin creams, sutures, burn dressings, and antacids. And there was a scientist in 1967 who won a Nobel Prize for his research into looking into sight, color, and light and dark receptors in horseshoe crabs. Like I mentioned before, they have 10 eyes, and they all have, very similar but somewhat different purposes. So the optic nerve in horseshoe crabs is definitely like a really big point of interest with researchers. So another really cool thing about horseshoe crabs that I didn't mention, but I briefly touched upon, was their blood. Not only is their blood blue, but it contains a really important compound called limulus amoebocyte lysate. I'm going to refer to it as LAL from now on because it is a mouthful and the acronym is way easier. And this compound is used to test the sterility of vaccines, pharmaceuticals, medical devices. This compound can tell when there's gram-negative bacteria present. So it'll start to agglutinate or get like really thick when there's the presence of this bacteria. And they're very common, like gram-negative bacteria are very common in water and like beach sand. And, if you've ever gotten a vaccine, you can thank horseshoe crabs because LAL is currently the only FDA approved method for testing a lot of medical tools. And in 2018, a company, Eli Lilly, develops like a synthetic blood that may cut the use down by 90%. But like I said, it's not FDA approved yet, and it's going to take a while before we know if it's possible to use it. This compound can also be used to test for contamination in food, water quality, and it is also used on NASA with NASA to sterilize a space station or anything that they send out in space, which I think is pretty cool because you wouldn't think of horseshoe crabs kind of having a tie to what goes on in space research, but they're pretty important. So if you've ever gotten a vaccine, you should thank your horseshoe crab. So there are several threats that horseshoe crabs face. One of them is biomedical harvest. Thousands and thousands of horseshoe crabs are bled each year in order to get that LAL compound. There are studies talking about the mortality rate as a result of this. Some say it's anywhere from 10% to 30%, but the Atlantic State Marine Fisheries Committee says it's roughly about 15% mortality, meaning that there is a good amount of death happening from us trying to get their blood. And they do typically try to take blood from the larger horseshoe crabs, and the larger horseshoe crabs are females. So, if the females are the ones most likely being harvested, they're most likely the ones to get that negative effect from this. And, females are very important for continuing on the species. So that's a pretty big threat, especially considering that we don't have another alternative for this. Another threat is bycatch. When you're fishing or when the trawls are happening, they could just end up in your net or hooked on your line, and sometimes you can't really prevent that. Another threat is coastal development or loss of habitat. They prefer sandy beaches, so the more sandy beaches we lose, the less habitat they have. And those rocky beaches those rocky North Shore beaches just don't do it for them. Another threat is climate change, which can lead to sea level rise, which again can lead to habitat loss. They are also really popular bait in eel and whelk fisheries. So not so much now, but very like back in the day, they were used all the time. And there are certain locations where they have bait bags that are required, which prevents your bait from being used up as quickly. And, you know, that's just like a small solution to that problem. Other types of threats are water quality, and that could be because of what's in the water, such as metals, pesticides, herbicides. And, you know, we do also think that the water holds a really big, it plays a really big role in the development of those eggs. So, you know, if the water is contaminated, it can really affect how those eggs hatch, or if they hatch at all. So right here, I kind of have some different time periods, and they're kind of talking about how many horseshoe crabs are harvested in those time periods. So in the 1870s, about 4 million crabs were harvested per year. And then we can see that by the 1960s, that number significantly went down. It's believed that that's because of, you know, us switching to different types of fertilizers. Back in the day, they were like their meat was used in the fertilizer, and then we stopped doing that. We switched to different kind of agricultural methods. So that might have played a really big role in that. And then the 1960s, that was pretty low, but then in 1970, that number went back up. And it is believed that, I mean, that number went back up. And then as you can see, it just continued to go back up. Now, New York State has voluntarily set its limit to half of what it's allowed, which means in the state of New York, we're not allowed to harvest more than 150,000 crabs per year. And that shuts down, like, for good for the year once that quota is reached. And the way that it works here in New York is that there's different, like, periods, and each period has a different number of horseshoe crabs that are allowed to be harvested. And I know that the DEC closes harvesting twice during the mating season, and for 2021, it was closed down from May 24th to May 28th, and it is closed down currently because it was closed from June 8th to the 12th. And so down here, I have that the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Committee conducted a benchmark stock assessment in 2019. And basically what that means is that they looked at the population and, you know, they collected some numbers, and what they saw is that along the southern Atlantic coast, the population of horseshoe crabs increasing, which is really good. It's pretty stable in the mid-Atlantic, but once you get to New York, we had a poor status, meaning that we are taking more horseshoe crabs than, you know, we see being born each year, which, you know, is not what we want, since we want to protect the species, since they're so important to us. For the most part, they were generally unstable for a while, and then when they conducted this assessment, it just went back down. So it could be due to fishing or poaching. Now, like I said, we're trying to conserve the species. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing as a park to, you know, play our part. So in 2009, Fire Island National Seashore banned fishing because our waters kind of serve as a reservoir to the Great South Bay. So it's believed that if we protect, you know, our spawning grounds and you can't fish, it'll, you know, funnel into the Great South Bay, and hopefully they'll get those young that survived in our area. And in 2011 to 2014, there was a study conducted. It looked at the number of spawning females, the number of clustering males, single females, single males, the length and the width of the crab, the ratio of male to female, beach conditions, weather conditions, and we also contributed in tagging. You know, ideally, you want the ratio to be close to 1-to-1. If it's a little off, meaning that there's more males or females, it could indicate that there's a problem. And then right here, I've included a picture of our horseshoe crab tags. So right here, it's showing that the tag is located on the left of the crab, and they tend to be these round tags. So if you ever see a horseshoe crab, there is a number on it, and you just report it to the number. I believe they mail you a little horseshoe crab pin when you do report the crab, which is really exciting. And the study did find that it could take up to 10 years for this population to recover, because females mature anywhere from 9 to 11 years old. So you need to wait for the females to mature so that they can, lay eggs. We do participate in horseshoe crab spawning surveys as well as tagging. One of our main sites is at the Fire Island Lighthouse on the Bay Beach. We do also monitor other sites in the park and, look out for potential new spawning sites. And we do these in collaboration with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. They have their own horseshoe crab monitoring program in collaboration with Cornell Cooperative Extension. So, we do pass our information on to them at the end of the season, but they have like this even larger scale project all across Long Island, like from west to east. And they do, I believe they do take volunteers for that. There is a website called New York Horseshoe Crab if you're interested in volunteering with them, or even with us. You can reach out to like a park biologist and try to get involved on horseshoe crab surveys as well. It's really fun, especially on those days when there's a ton of horseshoe crabs, because the beaches are literally covered. But this is just another picture of those horseshoe crab tags. This little strip up here is a reflective tag, so if you're out at night, you can see it, like even in the dark. If you like shine your phone light quick, you'll see the silver strip, and you just take the number, like right here it says tag number 177216. You would try to take the tag number and just tell them like your location and time, and it helps in helping us figure out where the horseshoe crab are moving or where they're going. So this is a little bit of what I mentioned before. The DEC and Cornell Cooperative Extension have their own horseshoe crab monitoring program. In 2015, they were recognized as a high priority species of greatest conservation need. And then the DEC is also an advocate for the illegal import of the Asian horseshoe crab. And there is also, there is like a fine if you know of anyone who is illegally importing that. So the town of Brookhaven has banned harvest at West Meadow Beach and Cedar Beach, and that's also two of the sites that they do horseshoe crab monitoring at as well. Molloy College assists in those horseshoe crab surveys, as well as Sacred Heart University. And then the horseshoe crab was listed as vulnerable in 2016 on the IUCN Red List, and then one of the Asian species was added in 2019. The other two aren't listed yet, but they are up for review. So in the next few years, that might change, or we might get some sort of updates. All right, do we have any questions about anything? I went through that a little fast, so feel free to ask anything.
I have a question.
Of course.
Where's a great place to see these? Does it matter any beach along the South Shore, or is there specific areas?
So they do prefer sandy beaches. So I do think you'll have better luck with horseshoe crab spawnings on the South Shore as opposed to the North Shore, because the North Shore is like really rocky. Not to say that you won't see them. so I like grew up in Huntington, and I know that two beaches by me that are really popular are like Crab Meadow Beach and the Centerport Yacht Club Beach. Those have, those are pretty popular horseshoe crab spawning sites. Um, I believe Pikes Beach is really popular. Mount Sinai is a really good place, like on the Bayside. They have some good beaches. And then even on Fire Island National Seashore. So we do surveys at Lighthouse Beach, which is that big beach right behind the Fire Island Lighthouse. That's a really good spawning site as well. But anywhere that there's sand, you'll probably be likely to see horseshoe crabs.
And that's just May and June, or do they come out throughout the summer?
They do come out throughout the summer, but not in as high of numbers. May and June are really like that hot spot time zone. And then nighttime is definitely, recommended, especially if it's around a full moon or new moon, because they're more likely to come up to shore to spawn. What else? If you also want the weather to be not too crazy, like if it's a really nice calm day, the wind isn't too strong, you'll be more likely to see more horseshoe crabs. And yeah, so I was thinking if I could think of anything else.
That's great, thank you.
Any other questions for anyone?
You can feel free to unmute yourselves or type it in the chat if you're more comfortable. Have you been part of any of those surveys, Roxana? Have you participated?
Yeah, so when I was an intern with Fire Island National Seashore when I was younger, I got to help out on some of those surveys. It was kind of like my first look at working with horseshoe crabs, which is why I'm very passionate about them. I'd always seen, shells or molts on my local beaches, but I never really saw a live horseshoe crab until I went to one of these horseshoe crab spawning surveys. And not only was it my first time seeing a horseshoe crab, but it was my first time seeing so many of them. Like the beach was covered. So I was really excited, to see so many. And I also got to tag some, which is really cool because not only was it my first time seeing them, I got to touch one that was alive instead of a carcass on the beach. But then I did also intern with the Department of Environmental Conservation, and I was their horseshoe crab intern, which honestly was inspired by my time at Fire Island. And that's why I know a little bit about the other monitoring sites. And, when I was doing that, I realized that these surveys could not be done without the help of volunteers. I know that things this year and last year have been a little difficult because there's restrictions on volunteering in some places, but I like to let people know about these opportunities because it's really exciting to be involved in science yourself, especially if you didn't go to school for this kind of stuff. There are a lot of people who want to get involved, but they don't know how to. So, I just like to let them know that there's opportunities, and you don't necessarily need to have a background in this kind of stuff. They do have training sessions. And there are volunteers who have been doing this for a long time who can also train new volunteers. And, it's really cool to just do your part in citizen science and contribute to this really big scale project, this long-term project, just, because we're going to need data for a long time, especially to really understand the trends of, mating and just trying to figure out what draws these crabs to come to certain beaches and stuff. So, if anyone is interested, the Cornell Cooperative Extension website is called newyorkhorseshoecrab.org. But we do also do monitoring through our park. So if you wanted to volunteer specifically with Fire Island, you can reach out to like a park biologist. I know we have information on our website, and the information that we collect does go back to the Department of Environmental Conservation and Cornell Cooperative Extension. So you would be in a way working on that big scale project as well. So, if anyone is interested, could even tell your friends. But I feel like that's a really good way to spread this information is through word of mouth, because that's how I found out about it, honestly. Like, I didn't think about Googling like volunteer opportunities near me. And I didn't know that horseshoe crabs was like one of those opportunities, but that's just one of the many, ways that you can get involved.
That's great. Thank you. Any other questions?
Okay. I have a question.
Oh. Yes.
What are we looking at on the screen? Are those barnacles on him?
Yes. So this is a horseshoe crab kind of burying itself in the sand. And then those are a ton of barnacles living on the back of it. And it's living its life relatively unfazed, but it does have a lot of them.
Is that typical that barnacles will grow on horseshoes?
It is. I've never seen like one with this many on them. I do think that they probably, so they like when they're swimming, I feel like it's harder for the barnacle to settle. So the older they are and like the slower they move, the more likely they are to be covered in barnacles like this.
I'm sorry if I missed it, but how long do they live? Do we know this?
So they can live up to 20 years, roughly. Any other questions? Or does anyone want me to go over anything that I mentioned in the presentation?
Okay, well, I think I'll talk about what's coming up next in our series. And if you want to put something in the chat before we go, please feel free to do that. But, thank you so much, Roxana, for sharing all of that information. It was really interesting. 10 eyes on a horseshoe crab is amazing. I didn't know these little tidbits of information. So I'm very glad that you were able to share that information with us today. Our next program in this series with the Fire Island National Seashore will occur on Wednesday, July 7th at 7 p.m., where we'll explore William Floyd's estate and history. So I hope you can join us then. You can register at communitylibrary.org or give us a call at the library at 631-399-1511. And if you wanted to know any more information about horseshoe crabs, as Roxana mentioned, feel free to contact the Fire Island National Seashore, and their website is nps.gov/FIIS. So that's it. Thank you so much again, Roxana. Oh, wait, before we go, there is a question, so let's get that answered.
All right. So I've got what happens during molting and what do they look like? So when the horseshoe crab is molting, it looks almost like when it sheds, like a snake sheds skin. It leaves behind an almost translucent, like, skin. Skin's not the right word because it's not skin, but it feels almost like the shell, but it's not as heavy. So it molts everything, like from its top to the Telson, even like its legs, you can see that inside the molt. And When they're out of the shell, they look exactly the same, but they're just a little squishier, and they look a little lighter brown. But they do, they grow their shell from like their, I don't want to say their inside, but their underside. It grows from like the underside to the top. And it does need water in order to grow its shell back.
Okay. Very good. Well, thank you, everyone. And again, thank you, Roxana, for a great presentation.
Thank
And if you'd like to see the presentation again, look for it on our Facebook page or our YouTube. Give us about a week to get it up there. And we'll talk to you guys soon. Thank you, Roxana.
you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.